I studied leather chemistry at university in Leeds, the only place in the UK then that you could do it. And I've worked pretty much totally in tanneries around the world. Some famous names originally, for those that know companies like Barrow Hepburn and those sort of people, and Gruppo David Rosati in Italy, and more recently companies like Echo that have a huge tanning division, and Pittards in the UK, who probably known to anybody who's interested in fine gloves and glove leather and things of that.
We use Pittards quite a fair bit ourselves, to be fair.
Yeah, of that sort. And then I had one spell actually working for one of Pittards' biggest customers in the sports industry. And anybody who plays golf will know that yesterday's British Open, was it? The winner was a Titleist and FootJoy sponsored golfer, and those two companies are owned by Acushnet, and I worked for them for about 10 years in the 90s, helping them source leather and helping them design products. So it's kind of an exciting period, but always in and out of tanneries. And now I'm I did a bit of teaching in marketing and with expanded work at Northampton University in retirement. And now I'm in that stage of scribbling about the industry and annoying a few friends, and very keen to stay in touch because the industry has been my life, and I'm quite keen to give something back.
Yeah, it's certainly a fascinating industry. I must admit, it's something that we love and certainly enjoy. So, where did it all begin for you? Was it as a child, or was it sort of something that your family did, or?
Well, my family did it, but my father was a surface chemist, and he was hired actually before the Second World War to a tannery, Muirheads in Glasgow, and his role was to make the finishes that went on automotive leather that they then sold to Detroit. And because there were no finishing companies that made proprietary leather chemicals in those days, so you sat with the ingredients in the tannery and had to make them. And so he did fascinating things. Like I remember a discussion one evening that he'd been working on the white finish for a soccer ball for a Rangers Celtic nighttime game when they started playing under spotlights, and the old brown ball wasn't visible enough. And he'd made the finish for them, apparently, and it was things like that. And then he moved into the general management of the factory. But I didn't want to join the leather industry. And while the school I went to, everybody did go back in the 60s to university. They all went to Glasgow University and stayed at home. And that didn't seem to me to be university. So I signed up for a course at St Andrews doing a combined arts science degree. And I got in, but then they wrote to me and said that the degree was in Dundee. They were going to run it in Dundee. And Dundee is a wonderful city now, but it wasn't a great place in the 1960s. And nor, mind you, was Glasgow, to be fair. And I'd always seen university as more of a collegiate type place like St Andrews, or that you heard of all through England. And I wanted to be away from home. So then I was in a quandary about what to do. And that was when my father said, well, there is a course at Leeds that you'd probably get into pretty easily. And you've got to say that leather does combine science and the arts. And it was an interesting conversation because it was the first time I'd ever heard anybody say that leather combined science and the arts, which
yes.
was what I was interested in. Here it was my father saying it to me. So he put me on a train to go down to Leeds for a couple of days, and gave me enough cash to be able to buy my breakfast and dinner on the train and the Pullman coaches. Wonderful experience. And they were actually short of students and desperate to get me, so I signed up there and then.
All right. Good.
And so I studied leather at Leeds and kind of fell into it. And I got very involved in politics at Leeds, and there was some talk about me going straight into a political career, but I then said no, I wanted to have an industrial career first before I made that move, and I joined the leather industry, and I never had that political career. The leather industry has been too fascinating.
Yeah, it's definitely fascinating. Yeah, political ones are strange.
Yeah, political ones are a strain, and politics has changed unbelievably in the last
hasn't
50 years, and so has the leather industry. But the leather industry is still a nice place. I'm not sure that politics is.
No, I think the way you look at the way they react in Parliament, it's almost like a comedy show some days, how they're all laughing at each other and heckling each other, and I don't think I'd want to be there personally.
No.
I don't think I'd want to be a politician of any party at the moment, no matter whether you're a party in power or party not in power, with COVID, because it's certainly a strain, with everybody. Obviously, today's the first day everybody can get together and allegedly hug each other, and why they couldn't do it yesterday, I don't know, but we better not start on politics, or else we'll never end.
I know. Stay clear and keep worrying about the pHs and nice sheens and hair strengths and things that really matter in life.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So obviously, leather chemist, what is it? What is a leather chemist, and how would anybody ever want to become a leather chemist?
Well, leather chemistry really came to prominence in the 19th century. And the first really big British leather chemist was Sir Humphrey Davy. And actually he won a prize for writing a book or a paper about the state of tanning in the UK about 1803, after studying it in a tannery here in Somerset, where I'm sitting, about 10 miles away from here. He spent a year, I think, in a village looking at all the tanning processes and talking to all the experts round about, and wrote this excellent paper. And he began to look at the chemistry that was involved in the vegetable tanning materials. As we went through the 19th century, you began to see the industry moving from being sort of, it was always a very chemical industry, because you are taking a collagen, which is the surface of an animal's body, and you're protecting that from being eaten away by bacteria and retaining its best qualities for service. And if you think, hides and skins were the first sheet material available to humans when they started standing up and wanting, to move about, and they needed shelter, and they didn't necessarily always have trees or caves to hide in, so they needed tents. And the only big sheet material was hides and skins. And it's absolutely fabulous biotechnology. Although sometimes you hear people complaining about it, that we used urine, or we used blood, or we used this, that, and that. And of course we did in the past, just like we did on laundry and cosmetics and everything else. Because biochemistry was a fabulous thing in history, but we didn't always understand the chemistry of it.
Yes.
One material would have ammonia in it, another, like we used dog dung, and it was a British chemist actually who discovered that what was in the dog dung was a pancreatic enzyme. And so now, for 20 years, we've never used dog dung because we use artificial pancreatic enzyme, which is exactly the way we're trying to get technology to go now to help make the planet a better place. And in the late 19th century, we began moving from traditional vegetable tanning into a faster tanning that our veg tanning in the UK took about a year because we use oak bark mostly. And we had to find something else because we'd cut down all the oak trees to build ships to attack Napoleon. So the tanning industry had a huge role, which was partly why Davy got involved. And we began to use mineral materials to tan leather, and then understanding the chemistry to make that work and do things a bit quicker became much more important. And that was when we began to study it, we began to teach it, we began to need people who could measure acidity and alkalinity in the tannery, and who began to take an interest as to what chemical reactions were actually going on. So the degree I did in Leeds was a 4-year degree, 3 years of pure chemistry, plus additional courses in specialist collagen chemistry, which is what the skin's all about, bacteriology, and things of that sort. So it was a chemistry degree plus a year of really fascinating specialist knowledge, specifically related to leather. And the sort, just to show you how valuable it was, we had 2 people on our course who came from a skin products company. Making cosmetics. Because the collagen chemistry is equally important in that business.
Obviously, you get some things from animals that go into the makeup industry, don't you? Anyway, so again, it's understanding the science behind it is obviously very important to understand all that. So I mean, certainly very interesting. I mean, we find it quite interesting when we're talking to people about veg tan leathers and things. They don't quite realize that it takes so long, to tan a veg tan leather because it's done with natural products. And it's amazing how many people actually think you get like pink and yellow and bright blue cows and things walking around when you clearly don't. And when you actually start explaining to them that obviously, the surface is painted, they're actually quite shocked, but then obviously suddenly realize that it is actually just a painted surface, on the leather. But it's surprising how many people, even still today, and again, that's where obviously the education comes in, where they don't realize that leather, the majority of leather is actually painted. And that you can remove that paint and obviously put new paint on there. It's amazing that people don't realize that, there aren't yellow cows and pink cows walking around. But obviously the impact, leather has on the environment. We obviously see all these people sort of like saying that cows are obviously causing all these gases and things, and, from cow manure and stuff like that, and belching and one thing and another. And what is the stand on this? I mean, because I know it's not factually correct, but what is the stand on that?
Well, the issue that arose with cows actually came up in 2006 when the FAO published a paper about livestock long shadow. And they quickly had to correct it because it was full of errors. But it basically painted a dreadful picture of the livestock industry by sort of taking all of the issues that you get around the world, from Amazon deforestation from one of their very worst years, to trying to keep a cow in American desert area where there's no water. It was really a curious way of calculating what livestock was about, and applying that to the whole world, a list of all the worst things that can possibly be, and applying it to the whole world and saying, well, that's carbon footprint of livestock. And it frightened everyone, and it gave the vegan community, particularly the aggressive animal rights bodies, like PETA, huge amounts of material to justify their position. Sure. And although that paper has been long discredited, it is still available online, like everything, nothing goes away, and it is still regularly quoted. And we've been suffering from it ever since as a leather industry. And as a leather industry, as the animal rights people began to attack us from sort of maybe 1990 onwards, we chose not to bother to react.
Sure.
We said that we were above all this and we weren't going to fight back. So we got well into this century before we began to realize that it was doing us, incredible harm, and would have an impact on the leather industry. But it's also doing a lot of harm to the poor cows.
Yes, absolutely.
Because the calculation, as you say, that's being done about cows is that animals like cows belch out methane, which is quite a powerful greenhouse gas. But unlike the main greenhouse gases, CO2 and N2O, methane only lasts in the atmosphere for 10 years. Whereas the other gases last for multiple generations, certainly beyond 1,000 years. Sure. The methane from livestock has been with us all through history, and it's part of photosynthesis. It's part of the biogenic cycle, so that when it breaks up, it provides the materials that allow our trees to turn green and our grass to grow, and the cattle then eat the grass, produce protein, which is a miraculous event, which we can eat. And we also complain that they use too much land to eat that grass on. But 2/3 of the world's agricultural land is too dry or too rocky to do anything else with but allowed to grow grass.
Sure. Yeah.
And so it's an incredibly sensible thing to keep cattle on. And of course now, as we're beginning to understand that farming should be more about making good soil than just keeping animals or growing crops, we are beginning to find this term regenerative agriculture, which is about keeping the soil in good condition. Livestock play a vital role in that, because in walking over the grass and in regularly grazing it, as long as it's done so that they don't overgraze it and damage the damage the land, their treading and eating helps to take CO2 out of the atmosphere, put it into the plant, but not just into the surface of the plant, but to push it down into the roots. And the roots then take it deep into the soil, and unless the land is plowed or dug up, that CO2 is trapped forever.
Sure, exactly.
And of course, unless the number of cattle increase, the amount of biogenic methane in the atmosphere stays level. And since 2000, since our agriculture globally's got a little bit more efficient, the world livestock population has actually, cattle population has been declining.
Yes.
So actually the amount of methane that livestock have been putting into the atmosphere has been reducing. And the problem that you've got to look at for methane in the atmosphere right now relates much more to escapes from fracking, from escapes from extracting oil in the Middle East, where nobody's counting the methane, but they're pushing it up the pipes and flaring it off and all the rest. And from all of these industrial sources.
Sure.
And of course, rather than attacking cattle and livestock, which are a potential solution to all this, we need to get looking at industry, at transportation, and at the other areas that really produce the wicked gases that are changing the climate. And the other huge advantage of the livestock, which we see enormously in the UK, is you need them to keep our grasslands in good condition. And that's important for biodiversity, for getting back some of the lost species.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got the other side of the coin, which people don't think about. It's obviously all the fake sort of leathers and things that you get as well. You know, people look at them and say, oh, they've won all these awards for them, but it's the actual, in a lot of the cases, it's the manufacturing process and the fact that they don't last anywhere near as long as what a normal leather skin does. Like, I mean, we get it, for argument's sake, on a lot of Mercedes nowadays. The skins that they put on those, I think it's Artico, as it's called on a Mercedes. I mean, Artico Artificial. And then you have Synthetech, I think, which is the one on BMW. Again, they're like a form of vinyl, but they're actually worse than a vinyl, and they break down so quickly. We've actually gone out to cars ourselves to repair cars at, you know, Mercedes dealerships where the cars aren't even a year and a half old and the skin's absolutely trashed and cracked, and it's at the point where it's got to be replaced. So how is that environmentally friendly when you've got to remanufacture that skin within a space of a couple of years compared to a leather one that can last hundreds of years? You know, and you've got to look at that side of it, haven't you, as well?
Well, certainly. I'm a trustee of the UK Leather Conservation Centre.
Yeah.
Have been for almost 20 years now. And what is wonderful is that we're getting in automobiles, you know, from 1903, 1905.
Yeah.
And the leather's still there.
Yes, exactly.
And our job isn't to replace it. It's just to conserve it.
Yep.
And there's, you know, it's all there to be conserved.
Yes, exactly.
So you might have a tiny amount of cracking. You might have an occasional tear, but it's, you know, leather does not die. And in these alternatives, there are two types of alternatives for leather. At the moment in automobiles, really only one of them, because the two types are plastic or they're other biomaterials. And I have a lot more time for the biomaterials because I think that if you're vegan and you've got an honest, ethical opinion about animals, you're entitled to that.
Sure.
What you mustn't do is abuse it and turn it into animal rights and start attacking people unfairly. But you're entitled to that. And I think some of the newer biomaterials that we have the choice of are very, very much better than the plastics that we've had up until now.
Yes.
And most of these plastics are they're either the old-fashioned vinyl that you mentioned, or they're polyurethane coated polyester.
Yep.
So you've got two types of plastic material in one. So incredibly hard to recycle.
Sure.
Assuming you can capture it because they're layered physically together.
Yep.
As you say, they don't last as long as leather. And when they do start to peel or disintegrate on the surface, they're impossible to repair.
Yeah. Yep.
So that, you know, you can look at an airplane with its seats lasting there for 8, 10, 12 years, even with incredibly hard daily wear.
Yep.
Or a plastic copy that will last 3 to 5 years and be incredibly difficult to do anything with. And you cannot repair it. And in automobiles, I think it's a disaster, frankly, what I'm seeing. And I do actually feel that a lot of what's being put forward as being ethical or environmentally friendly is actually just a smokescreen for cheaper price.
Yes. Yep.
And it has to do with all this leasing of cars and people only owning them for 2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years, yeah. It's just sort of seems to be the normal, doesn't it? With manufacturers at the moment, they don't expect a car's lifespan to be more than 5 sort of years maximum. And it's, you look at cars, as you say, cars from 1901 and onwards, and I mean they're still running today, and they've survived, and still some of them still completely original.
Well, you see, I keep my cars. I don't lease them. I buy them and I keep them.
Yeah,
and my previous one just turned up here on Friday because my daughter-in-law drives it, and she brought it over from Wales for us to sit outside and have a chat, as we were allowed to do. And there, driving into our little drive at the end of the garden, was our old car. And the seats are in perfect condition. And I actually feel that a good leather seat in a car after 5 to 10 years is better than when you bought it. It's more of a friend. It's got more character, and then we need people like you just to put it right if anything goes wrong, or if we but I've been lucky, and the seats on my cars have all been perfect, and I think it's a lovely experience. The idea of plastic is a wonderful invention, but plastics were only designed to last in use 10 to 20 years. And but the essential plastic doesn't biodegrade, as we know.
Yes.
It lasts 500 to 1,000, and some plastics they think might last up to 1,000,000 years. But they do disintegrate in salt water into these tiny particles. But it's disintegration, it's not a chemical change. The plastic's still there. What stops them being serviceable is that the various softeners and other things that you add to allow them to work, they leak out. And the plastic disintegrates, and so they become useless for purpose in a short period of time, but then they don't in any way biodegrade. It's totally the reverse of what we have with leather.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, at least with the leather, it's recyclable at the end of the day, isn't it? It's and I think you've done articles on people with using old aircraft seats, haven't you? With making, is it handbags and things?
Yeah, well, I personally am minded that a piece of leather, in a way, never dies. We know that if you have the old drinking vessels that people used to take on ships like the Mary Rose, because you could drop them on the ground and they never broke. You can see initials of them in the museums where they've passed from father to son. And if one should get damaged, what they tended to do was just cut a little bit extra out of them and hang them on the wall above the fireplace to keep salt in. So everything got repurposed. And we see boots in Vindolanda on the Roman wall that have been repaired. People just never threw away the leather things. They can be continuously repaired and refurbished. And then at end of life, if there's a real end of life, like with an aircraft seat, turning them into handbags and small leather goods is a simple exercise. And it's a wonderful social occupation for people to get people back into work, into learning new skills, and for designers to be creative with. So you look at leather and you think a piece of leather should never die.
It's a nice craft, isn't it? It's like a dying art in this country. We're sort of losing all our traditional sort of handmade sort of background that Britain is known for, and it's it's something that you can at least still sort of do with this sort of trade. It's that sort of handcrafted side to it, whether you're making something like a handbag or repairing it. It involves a certain degree of skill, compared to a lot of trades.
No, you're absolutely right. And it is, if you're looking at what we define as sustainability, and you go to the United Nations original definition from Brungart's first report, it mentions that the whole object of sustainability is about pulling people out of poverty without damaging the planet with all of our dangerous new technology. It's about getting that balance right, leaving the planet suitable for our children while pulling people out of poverty. And the jobs that people get making leather goods, making shoes, making bags, making gloves, they are fabulous skills.
Yep.
To help pull people out of poverty, or in our part of the world that's a little bit richer, to make more luxury, more expensive leather goods, as France does with a huge number of people in luxury goods. And I think in France, you will find that about 1,600 people in their tanneries create 70,000 jobs in the country, making goods and selling and exporting goods.
Yeah, there's a lot of employment.
There's a huge amount of employment. Yeah. Tanneries are fairly well automated these days.
Yep.
But automating the manufacture of leather shoes and leather gloves and leather garments and the making of seats for automobiles, they require people with sewing machines, people with judgment,
yep.
People with a wide range of skills. And that's fabulous. That's really good, rewarding employment. It's important in the emerging world, and it's important in the developed world. And we need to bring it to bring it back and use it more.
Yeah, definitely. It's like I've always said to people, obviously with us running training courses and things, I've always said to them, it's, in my opinion, it's one industry that we're in that I don't think will ever die, like certain industries where it can be made or done with robots. This involves, it's something that a robot I don't feel could ever possibly do, because you could be doing something and all of a sudden you've got to do something else, which the robot wouldn't be able to have that sort of degree of knowledge to be able to do that, whereas at least we've got that, and it's that skill that it involves to do that. It's like, for argument's sake, just two-toning a piece of leather. I mean, trying to get a robot to do a repair on it would be, in my opinion, almost virtually impossible.
Well, there is actually a very good paper written in the 1980s by Professor Sahal, who started the whole circular economy concept, and he wrote the papers which led to the Cradle to Cradle book being written. And he says that he believes that if, as societies, we tried to keep things longer and we repaired them, two things could be the outcome. One, that our emissions, our CO2 and the rest, that by nations could probably be reduced by about 70%.
Yep.
And he also then said that the repairing, keeping things year after year by repairing them more often, would employ 4% of the working population in jobs that could not be replaced by robots.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So,
yeah, certainly. Yeah, which is what I've always said to people. It's, at least it's, in the service industry, it's something that can't be taken away or overtaken by a robot, which is what I love with the industry. And it's something different every day with what we do, and it's, it's really good. And I mean, that sort of takes us on to the next thing with Leather Naturally. I believe you're involved, with Leather Naturally, which is, again, I find quite fascinating to read all the things that they do.
Yeah, well, Leather Naturally began about 1908. No, 2008. 1908 is a bit long ago. 2008. And we were out in at the big leather the main, actually, international leather fair in Hong Kong every year. Yep. APLF. And there were a few seminars in which people were saying, and of course, leather is a bad thing. And of course, cows are a bad thing. And I was asked to, if I would write a wee paper about this. And we called the concept brand leather at that time, in part because I'd been asked to give a lecture in '94 by the International Council of Tanners on the brand leather.
Yep.
In which I explained I thought the leather industry was too fragmented to understand a global brand like leather ought to be. And in a way, I still think that, because the leather industry does remain frightfully fragmented. It's if you want a perfect example of silo thinking, we still managed to do it. But anyway, in 2008, it became very clear that we had to do something, and we started gathering groups of tanners and leading individuals from around the world, and started saying, we've got to start explaining the truth about leather, and we've got to start counterbalancing all these very negative comments that are becoming mainstream. And brand leather in a couple of years changed its name into Leather Naturally. And we looked at two things, providing educational material that was accurate, scientifically accurate, and in terms of trying to communicate with the younger generations that historically would have grown up in an agricultural society, but are now growing up in an urban society.
Sure.
And, you know, quite often don't see cows till they get into their teen years. And, you know, it's a bit like you were saying, they, you know, they think a Chesterfield comes from a cow that had the buttons in it while it was still alive.
Yeah, exactly.
That sort of pink cows and blue cows and things of that sort. Well, you know, that's a new phenomenon. In the same way as you're talking about, you know, leather lasting a long time and being repairable. We only stopped thinking that in the second half of the 20th century, when this huge consumption society came along, where everybody got things cheaper and thought it was appropriate to throw things away.
Chemist throw away society, yeah.
Yeah, you know, if you go back to the first half of the 20th century, nobody thought that. This is a new phenomenon that we're trying to reverse. We're trying to reverse the very late. So we pushed Leather Naturally along. Now that I'm getting older, I've stepped back. There's a new young team running it. I still speak on its behalf when they let me, and I still write odd documents for them and stay in touch. But they've got a very good team. They've got a campaign called Mecha, which is a digital magazine that has got millions and millions of people reading it in different formats on different social media, and is clearly beginning to have an impact through society around the world. And the education side is publishing leaflets and documents, a huge amount of material on the website to help on education, from everything from the agricultural side, as you mentioned, through to the end of life side and use, and try and remove some of this dreadful fear we have in society about chemistry.
Yes.
You know, as though the water that we drink is not chemistry. You know.
Yeah. I mean, I obviously started off with my background in farming originally. I mean, I was originally from Berkshire, and you know, in a little small village called Kintbury, just near Hungerford, in the middle of Hungerford and Newbury. And obviously it was all farming land. So of course I grew up, my father was a landscape gardener. So, I mean, I grew up around the sort of farming industry, and the first thing I got involved with was milking cows by hand, and obviously riding a tractor that could probably only do about 8 or 10 mile an hour on the road maximum. And obviously, you know, that was when I was sort of like 13, so I couldn't ride them on the road. But, you know, I sort of got involved with that with a traditional sort of little plow, you know, not like what they are today with monstrous things that, you know, almost need armed escorts to ride these tractors down the road, you know, to farm the fields and things. But it's, you know, and I obviously started off at a young age with brothers and things in the army, with being told by my father that spit and polished with the shoes, and I had to do everybody's shoes in the family because we were from a family of, with mum and dad, it was sort of like 8 people, and there was a lot of shoes to clean and polish, and I was the one designated to do that from an early age, and nobody else could do it, and I was the one that was told to do it and always did it very well. And because I did it so well, it ended up being my job for life. And that's what we still do now, is obviously leather.
Yeah, it's fascinating how everyone does come into it, but you do sort of worry about the fact that it's such an urban society, and if our children only hear bad things about agriculture and don't have any opportunity to see or hear the other side of the story, which we all did. I know I grew up in a suburb of Glasgow, but even there, at the top of the road, there was a dairy farm.
Yep.
And, in those days, it wasn't all, closed for biological fear reasons. And it was free to walk in, and you'd go in and, they'd wave you over to look at the chickens that had just been born. And it was part of everyday kind of life,
yes.
And you were free to wander about, but it's much, much harder for children today in an urban environment and being driven everywhere in motor cars to actually understand and interface with these natural things. And as you mentioned on the big tractors, there is this danger of a divide in agriculture between the factory farming and the old farming.
Yes.
And I think if you're looking at regenerative agriculture as being part of the global solution, it does require a certain calming of this factory farming, which is risking biodiversity. I think if we look at more regenerative agriculture as a way to provide meat in the future, here in the UK, my understanding is that we would end up eating quite a bit less pork and chicken, a little less beef, but about the same amount of lamb.
Yep.
So I'm not necessarily one that says that we should carry on eating meat in huge quantities forever. I think there is a balance here, and I am a bit of a fan of the more regenerative, grass-fed type agriculture than the intensive systems that we see elsewhere.
Yeah, I prefer the grass-fed. It's always been something that I've said, if I could get to the stage where I could buy some land, I'd like to sort of do what I call traditional farming, and with the lambs and different birds and things, and sort of have proper sort of natural sort of eggs from them, that's not farmed in intensive ways and stuff like that. I mean, it's always been nice fresh fruit and vegetable. It's just always been something that I've always dreamed of doing, and I always try to grow veg at home if I can. I prefer to do it that way. It's you know where it's come from. I mean, you know what chemicals you put into the ground at the beginning, to make them grow.
I think you're quite right. I think there's a little bit of a shame after the 1940-45 war, after we dug up all the fields to grow crops, that we didn't revert back to the mixed farming that we'd had before. And instead we moved to the sort of ICI and supported, throw chemicals on the land and separate livestock farming from arable farming, and grow crops in huge fields with lots of chemicals to kill everything. And it took us 3 decades to realize the harm that was doing, but by that time we were using bigger and bigger tractors with bigger and bigger plows, so we needed bigger and bigger fields to get them around, and we grubbed out all the hedgerows and things.
Exactly.
And so it's hard to recover from all that. And in a way, I suppose one of my issues through Leather Naturally, and why I hope the industry will continue to support Leather Naturally and see it as the best sort of global body to speak for leather globally. I think the national associations have a very important job to do, and in the UK, UK Leather is doing a good job now, after being a little bit moribund over the years, but always one of the best national organizations. But I do think Leather Naturally has to really, really speak out globally for the industry. And one of the areas that really did kind of get me was this view saying, leather's only a byproduct of the farming industry. Therefore, we have nothing to do with what goes before. Now we are a wonderful user of a waste product from the meat and dairy industry. But I don't think that means we're disassociated with it.
No.
And I think where we've helped in the past on things like hide improvement societies, and when I started in the industry, we helped to fund the removal of warble fly from cattle in the UK, which was a horrible disease for the animals, which damaged their meat and their milk, as well as making big holes in the hides. And I thought that relationship was very healthy, and one that we should continue, even although nobody keeps any of the main pigs, goats, sheep, or cattle for their hides. That's impossible. We are strictly a byproduct or a waste product or a non-determining product, and we're seeing that now in the United States with all this cheap plastic that you're talking about.
Yeah,
and that,
exactly.
About 20%, I think 17 was the last figure I heard, of American hides are now being buried.
Yes.
Because they're hard to sell, because more and more people are using plastic. And I think that's a dreadful, dreadful waste of the world's resources, to be digging out fossil fuel in order to make plastics.
Yep.
And to be burying beautiful collagen at quite high expense, $5 a hide or something, costing to bury it, which would last forever and make wonderful, wonderful materials.
It's one of the, obviously with us dealing globally, America is the only country in the world where the majority of leather that people come to us to get repaired, it is fake leather, like the bonded leather and things. And they actually believe they have been sold a genuine leather item. And it's only once you point it out to them that they realize that it is actually fake. But America seems to be the only country in the world where we have, yes, you get fake leather in most countries, in all countries of the world, but America, for some reason, just seems to be the biggest problem for us as a country as a whole, where we seem to deal with more fake leather, especially on furniture, than anything else.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that from the United States. I always thought in the United States, they were very sort of pro animals, and that you wouldn't get so much fake over there.
Yeah, we actually get quite a lot of fake over there, to be fair. It's especially on sofas, and it's all this bonded leather. It seems to be nearly every one we get people wanting us to repair. It is a fake one. It's actually staggering the amount that's out there. Again, I was out there in January last year, and sort of looking around different stores and things just to sort of see, and all the sort of office stores and things, and Home Depot, which Home Depot is the same as B&Q here, and different sort of stores, and all the sort of stuff. It's like, it actually does say on it, this is a leather supplement. It's not a genuine leather item. And it's surprising how many office chairs are like that, and furniture in the USA. It's surprising.
I think that's really, really disappointing, because, not only are we losing these, hides from the leather industry and skins from the leather industry, because when I began, the one thing that we always used to say was that every hide and skin that could be economically collected anywhere in the world, ended up in leather, and that put a ceiling on how much leather we could make. But we never expected to have significant percentages of the hides being sold away because being thrown away because nobody would actually buy them.
Yeah.
And it's a biophilic material. It's a natural material. A piece of leather is made of collagen.
Exactly.
With tiny additional amounts of other chemicals in it. That's why people wrap their their technology in it, their phones and their tablets and things. That's why it's coming more and more into coffee shops and town centers, interior design, is because people want a touch of nature to counterbalance the stainless steel and aluminium glass that they're living with in these urban environments. That's the whole thing about biophilic materials, and to be replacing leather with plastic is it's something we're going to end up deeply regretting.
Yeah, I think so. And it's like you say, with all the cafes and things, it is the people are connecting with nature, aren't they, with this leather in there? Because I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's a natural thing, and they are connecting with the nature of the outside world, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, so I was hoping I'd be spending more of my time now helping develop, nicer leathers out of some of these slightly scratched hides. That some consumers, need to be persuaded is the right thing.
Yes.
Because to me, a leather with a scratch in it is actually evidence of its history, its personality. And I absolutely love the eco campaign that they had a few years ago when they started using yak on their walking boots. And they were saying the scratches on these boots, evidence, that this animal has, survived at 15,000 feet or whatever in all conditions, and it understands the life that a hill walker is wanting to take it on. And I think it was just a wonderful campaign, and I like that. But instead, we're throwing them in the ground, and using, inadequate, unsuitable alternates.
Yeah, I mean, it's like nature has its own course. It's like, we're sort of obviously people that have their view and opinion, which they're, as you said, quite rightly saying, which I do as well. They're entitled to be a vegan and have that opinion, and it's how they address that opinion. But we can't actually walk up to a lion in the safari and tell it to stop eating a zebra. And again, they're eating meat, as well, aren't they? So.
And yeah, I think there's a huge fallacy personally in this idea of going to a vegetarian diet, and there are too many supplements that you need to eat if you go to a vegetarian diet. I don't believe that as omnivores that we should have a steak for lunch, dinner, and tea. I do think there's a nice balance in the diet, and I also think that a lot of the problem that we're creating for ourselves is having so much processed food.
Yes.
From meat rather than the high quality meat. But equally, what I see in all the substitute sort of burgers and things is they're very heavily processed. And they're coming from quite doubtful origins. So I think that I sense that we're escaping from using meat by giving ourselves substitutes that we don't fully understand the damages to come.
Yes, exactly.
What we just need is to have more sensible, balanced diets. And of course, here in the UK, where we're talking, you see how much of our household budget, food has diminished.
Yes. Yep.
Well, we shouldn't have let that happen over the last 30, 40 years.
No, exactly.
We need to understand food better. We need to move away from this fast food life, cook a bit more of our own, and get back, just like we need to polish our shoes every weekend as you did. We need to learn how to cook a more balanced diet and live a slightly more peaceful life with less fast food and less low quality, cheap food. Pay a proper price for it.
Definitely. Yeah. Tell me, it's like our final question, really. What is your favorite leather stroke finished leather? What's your favorite one? Are we talking veg tanned, or are you talking like pigmented, or?
No, I like natural leathers.
Yeah.
I wonder. Here's my favorite. If you don't mind me waving something up.
Right.
This is an old Coach bag.
All right. Yep.
I bought that in New York, 1987. Yeah, 1987. It was, I was going over to New York to try and sell Coach some leather.
Yep.
And I didn't know much about them then. They were only a $80 million brand, not a $4 billion like they are now.
Yep.
And I was trying to sell them some leather, and I went into a store the day before to see what they made, and I saw that bag and I liked it. And the leather was English tan, and actually the next day I came away with an order for 60,000 feet of English tan leather that we had to make for them from the UK, which was the start of a very good relationship with them. And that bag actually, it's a natural leather. It's not a full veg, but it's a veg retan.
Yep.
It's got a wax finish on the top. So the only treatment that you give it now and then is a bit of a wax polish. And I've got a wee sponge that I do that with. But they used really high quality threads. They used big brass zips.
Yep.
Because zips are the things on bags that always go wrong first, and then the stitching. But they've both been very good. So I haven't actually had it be repaired. And apart from the 1990s, when we were carrying these 10-ton laptops about, and I used something else for 5 or 6 years, it's been my everyday bag since for work since 1987, and I absolutely love it. And I love the leather. I love the feel of the leather. And there's marks on it where I've spilled things. There's marks on it from dirty, sweaty fingers and things. But with the polish, it comes up really well. It oozes personality. It grows more, just like we mentioned on the car seat. The years have made it a friend.
Patina it gains. It's beautiful. It's like mulberry, the Bayswater mulberries. I mean, they come with the natural veg tanned, and it's just the characters that they gain over the years and the different sort of shades and colors that they gain. I mean, my wife's got one, and it's just, they're just a beautiful bag with all the characters that they gain, with it being, it's the oak veg tan one that she's got from mulberry. And they're just such a beautiful bag with the characters that they gain.
And that's exactly why so many people still have original mulberry bags.
Yep, exactly. Yep. And it's just, they just go on and on forever.
They just go on and on forever. And of course, now, as you, I think we saw the other day, Mulberry came out on Earth Day, that they're going to ramp up their repair and refurbishment section, and to recycle them for people if they want to replace them with something else, and have a sensible afterlife for them in repurposing. A really considered policy, and to even add to what we already know as a wonderful bag that's going to last for decades.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's good to see them doing that, to be fair. I mean, they have sort of done small amounts in the past, but to see them sort of ramping it up to do that, it's obviously, yes, they're obviously going to earn money from the repair side of it, but it's also sort of puts that sort of recycle element there, doesn't it, to help with the environment again. It's helping to keep that sort of remanufacturing process down again with everything.
Yes, well, my worry with a lot of the brands is they have sustainability officers who are well educated, but they're not chemists.
Yes.
So they hear some of this stuff about the methane and livestock and things that you mentioned earlier on in our discussion, and they take it as being the truth.
Yes.
And they say, all right, we can't have anything to do with cows. Or they hear some of the chemicals used in the tanning process, and they hear the word toxic, even although they don't even bother to look up the definition of toxic.
Yes, exactly.
Because water's toxic if you end up with too much of it, and that's the definition of toxic. Really, anything in excess. So most of the brands actually, I think, worry me quite a lot for some of the judgments that they lean towards not being based on a true understanding of the science. And an awful lot of brands have got rid of their leather chemists and people with real knowledge of leather, and use more junior staff. But Mulberry seem in what they wrote in all the newspapers that day, and to have on their policy, they seem to have thought through from the farmyard upwards to the end of life.
Yes.
Every element with some quite good thinking, and I was very, very impressed with it indeed.
Yeah, it was certainly a good read. Definitely, certainly a very good step forward for them to be taking. Anyway, definitely.
Yeah.
So it's been a fantastic discussion today, I must admit, Mike. It's been wonderful to actually meet you in the flesh, so to speak, even though we're via a camera. Always talking as much as we can and asking questions on Twitter and things for advice and help and things, but never sort of seen each other. And hopefully one day we can meet and shake hands in person. So it's
that would be very nice sometime. Yes,
indeed. Yeah, definitely. So it's been absolutely wonderful for you today. Thank you so much for your time. It's been appreciated, and I'm everybody's going to be excited to hear the podcast as well when we put it live in the next sort of few hours anyway. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.
You too.